I had the kind of shift that starts off ordinary by promise and ends up heavy by silence. Nights have a texture, you notice it when your badge opens doors other people don't think about. By 11 the hospital quiets into machine breaths and elevator dings that don't belong to anyone in particular. I float, wherever there's a gap, I land. That week, flu season cut through the staff like a pair of scissors, and assignments were more about plugging holes than following departments. I clocked in, grabbed the on-call pager, and told myself I'd be grateful for boredom. I was halfway through double-checking restraints paperwork when the overhead cracked to life and poured itself into every hallway speaker at once. Code Blue, Room 217. The voice belonged to the night operator, the one who always sounded calm enough to make you borrow her confidence. It echoed off wax tile and inside steel elevator doors. The syllables walked down the corridor and back. My body moved before my brain did. You hear, Code Blue, and you go. Charge stepped into the doorway with the code phone already in her hand, eyes sliding past me toward the main elevators. I felt the pager on my hip vibrate and I was already moving when the second call came, same voice, same words, Code Blue, Room 217. It should have been simple. You know your building. First number, floor. Second, room. But our hospital doesn't have a room 2 to 17. We have 201 through 216 on 2 West, and 220 through 240 on 2 East, which is closed for renovation. 17 never existed. It isn't a thing people say to be mysterious. You can look at the laminated map bolted to the wall outside the main stairwell and find exactly where the rooms are supposed to be. There is no 2 to 17. People who haven't worked nights think calls like that turn into scenes, crowds in scrubs sprinting. Mostly, it's focused. A few of us hit the stairwell and someone else gets the code cart and someone else rides the main elevator because that's the thing nearest them. We talk to each other with our feet. At the second floor landing we came out into a corridor with the lights turned down to evening levels and the smell of floor polish not quite dry where the machine had passed. The doors to 2 West were open, nurses inside, not alarmed, one of them already pointing left because she'd heard the call too and it didn't belong to her. 2 East was dark and sealed off with metal studs and painted fireproof sheeting, the kind of closure that says, months, not days. Charge kept the code phone to her ear and spoke into it like she was trying not to wake something. We have no 217, she said. Repeat location. The operator didn't sound confused, she sounded like a person reading a card. Code Blue, Room 217. We stood in a hallway halfway between what existed and what didn't, listening to a voice that insisted. Security was already there, 2 of them, because when a voice booms through a building in the middle of the night, they listen too. The older one with the clipboard said, East is locked down. Contractor padlocks are tagged. We can pop the door if you want, but there's nothing to find. You learn to ignore the phrase, nothing to find. Contractors like owner-provided locks and posted signs, they like schedules nobody keeps. If there's a way for something odd to hide in a hospital, it's behind a partition with a paper taped to it that says, do not enter without PPE. We didn't pop the door yet. There's a ritual to doubt. You look at everyone else and you do the simple checks first. We walked the length of 2 West, peered into rooms with late television glow and closed curtains. You can tell at a glance where something is wrong by the way the color sits on a face, by how the blankets tell on the body underneath, by the way a monitor chooses to be either indifferent or insistent. The unit hummed. No one was in distress. ICU upstairs would call us if they were running, they hadn't. The overhead stayed quiet while we checked, like a person who said their piece and is waiting to be proven right. The operator called charge directly and said, it printed on the old panel too. What she meant was the analog repeater in the switch room had stamped out a strip for the code as if it were any other call. Those old thermal printers are like stubborn ghosts of the hospital's past. You can remove the system and they'll still sit there curling paper into a basket for years because nobody wants to pay for the electrician to cap the wires. 217, the operator said. I have no ward name. The second time you're told a thing you can't accept, your hands get helpful. Security cut the contractor lock with a bolt cutter that had bitten more than it wanted to admit. The partition door creaked and a sheet of construction dust lifted and described the air the way shaken glitter does. Beyond it, 2 East was a gut job, no ceiling tiles, wires gathered like hair, doorframes empty of doors. The exit signs still worked because they always work, that's their nature. Our lights made a tunnel, beyond it was the suggestion of a fork. And there, across the dust, 2 sets of parallel lines curved like arcs where gurney wheels had once traveled months ago and then again more recently than dust would prefer. Keep it brief, Charge said. The word brief in a place without time is just a way of asking your feet not to forget who they belong to. We followed the curves in the dust and they traced us into the far end of 2 East where a half-wall suggested a future nurse's station and beyond that a corridor that had been 2 corridors in another life. Contractors leave chalk on studs, arrows, numbers, jokes, and I read 2E Heartsuit 217 in sloppy handwriting that looked like a message written by someone who'd been told to amuse themselves between smoke breaks. I was about to make fun of it when my flashlight found paint on plaster, the kind of paint you only see in old stairwells, thick and multiple and oddly glossy. The light caught an edge where something had peeled under a past flood. Someone had spray primed over an older color, and the primer had turned yellow at water lines, and under it, just at ankle height, a number showed itself in a font the building didn't use anymore. 217, not stenciled straight, not the way a professional would, but it was there. When you name a thing, you give it a place to sit. I wanted the number to be a prank, a mocking shadow of the call we'd heard. But the age of the paint said otherwise, and the way the dust pattern avoided that portion of wall said people had walked here not too long ago and respected a space their eyes didn't recognize but their muscles did. Charge told me to stay with security while she went back to the phone. We like to be practical about mysteries, you break them into scheduling issues. Contractor switches might feed a stray line into the PA, someone might have tested a script on the operator's console, some old system linked to a number that didn't get retired. The building is a body too. It keeps scars. While she talked, the overhead did it again. Code Blue, Room 217. The acoustics in a partially demolished ward make every sound feel like it lives a little too long. The voice rolled down the bare corridor and over our shoes. Security looked at each other and then at me, the way people do when they want someone else to volunteer an answer. I said, "Is the old panel mounted in the switch room still physically printing?" The older guard said yes, he'd seen the curls of heat paper himself when he'd been assigned upstairs. The younger one, who had freckles and a new radio with the sticker still on it, said, "What's a switch room?" and nobody answered him because the job has a way of filling in blanks without conversation. 2 more nurses found us, drawn by the duplicate call. We were now 4 against a corridor full of decisions. I put my palm on the painted wall where the old number showed its shape and left a glove print in dust. The wall had that cool, damp feeling old walls remember even when they dry, moisture that has more to do with history than weather. You think about breath when your hand is on a wall like that, not the kind you take, but the kind time does. We didn't charge the corridor like heroes. We moved like people who know that buildings contain both excuses and apologies. The young guard swept his flashlight ahead and it picked out an old sign half swallowed by primer near the ceiling, elevator, painted directly on plaster sometime before someone thought signs should be interchangeable. The arrow pointed left toward what was now a plywood barrier. Charge came back through the partition door with a contractor badge she'd borrowed off a corkboard and the look of a person who has chosen bureaucracy as a weapon. "They still have power live to the east distribution panel," she said. "Operator swears no test. Switch says they didn't send it. IT says the nurse call system that used to drive those overheads was decommissioned in 2019. She said all this like lines of a play you deliver because that's what you're paid to do while your heart stares at a number on a wall. We slid the plywood enough to squeeze through. In the new darkness beyond was the elevator lobby, stripped down to structure. The call button hung on a wire in the way teeth hang on milk gums. The elevator itself was still on the shaft, powered from some feed the contractors hadn't turned off yet because moving that wire would cost more than waiting. The indicator showed 2 without shame. I pressed the call because I am stupid in the way people are stupid when reason fails and they want machines to prove they're indifferent. The car didn't move. I was grateful. There was a metal box on the wall where the old nurse call panel had been. The plate had been removed and left leaning like a picture someone moved because it offended them. Inside I could see the stubs of wires that used to talk to the rest of the building. Printed along the edge was a serial number and below it a label, faded to a nervous brown, 2 East Annunciator. Someone had scrawled 2017 in Sharpie and drawn a smiley face. If you've never worked in a place long enough to know its handwriting, trust me, buildings have one. The way the letters leaned, the way the lines hesitated, it was ours. Okay, I said to the number on the wall and the box and whoever might have wanted me to say it. We're here. What do you want us to do? Before anyone could tell me not to talk to sarcasm, we heard it. Not over the speakers this time, those were quiet. We heard a faint burst of static that didn't belong to a radio, the kind of sound small transformers make when they wake from sleep for no reason. It seemed to come from above us, then from the left, then from nowhere at all because there was nothing left mounted to make a noise. It went away as quickly as it came. The younger guard's shoulders tightened under his uniform. The older one said, "Power bleed," like he was trying to convince the air. We did what all practical people do in the face of the inexplicable. We decided to pretend there would be paperwork later and chose a simple test now. Charge called switchboard and said, "Can you please repeat the exact text of what printed?" The operator read the strip on her end, code blue, room 217, second floor, call received 016. The time matched neither when she made the overhead announcement nor when we heard it down here. It was stamped a few minutes ahead of both. Time is not polite when a building forgets which part of itself is in charge. We split because that's how you make large things more manageable. Charge went back out to West to let them know we were not abandoning a ghost, we were containing a problem. The guard stayed with me while I traced the corridor to where 2 to 17 would have been if numbers paid attention to wishes. There was a door arch with no door and a rectangle in the dust where something had lived briefly, a cart, a toolbox, a short hope. On the right side of the arch the primer had cracked and peeled away in a shape like a missing wing. Under it, the paint beneath was hospital green from the 1980s, the kind of green you paint on a place where you plan to tell people they're fine when you aren't sure. In that green there was a faint outline where a placard had been. Glue residue holds on longer than paint does. If you looked slantwise you could see the shadow of numbers like bruises under makeup. 217. I want to say I was composed. The truth is I felt a sudden insistence in my chest, the kind you feel when the elevator you're on stops between floors and you rediscover church without wanting to. I stepped into the frame and stood in a space that had once been room-shaped and was currently nothing at all. The air moved across my face as if someone had opened a window in another life. It didn't smell like dust in there the way it did in the hall. It smelled like the place had remembered itself, bleach that stopped mattering hours ago, a towel that dried fast, the cold edge of a vent. When you work nights you develop a superstition about talking, how loud, when, to whom. But superstition and empathy are cousins, and I don't turn my back on either. I said, out loud but not stridently, as if I had walked into a room with the living in it, "We're here. If you need help, say it however you can. If we've missed you, I'm sorry. If you're stuck, I can stand here a while." I don't know what I expected. What I got was far less and more. In the hallway, someone's radio clicked, dead air. The young guard whispered, "You hear that?" The old one said, "I hear you talking to plywood, because humor is the little bridge we build over fear to see if it will hold." Then, without the overhead speaking, we heard a single tone fade up and fade down, the kind the old overhead system used to run before the operator's voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere and I felt a little ridiculous, the way you do when a building has chosen to make a point you can't write up in a report. And then a voice, hers, spoke again, through the speakers that didn't exist on this side of the partition. Code Blue, Room 217. I stepped out of the doorway and went to the metal box again and put my fingers on the cut wires like a person checking a wrist, and I said, without thinking, "We are not the code team you're looking for," which made the young guard bite the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing and made the older one say, "Don't," as if words themselves had a way of tugging on something you shouldn't. We did what we could do. We walked the length of the old corridor slowly, the way you walk through a room where someone is asleep and you don't want them to wake afraid. We noted where the chalk marks were freshest and where dust settled deeper. We made humane guesses about how long it had been since the contractors had been here and who might have been the last to touch what. We listened. We didn't get a request or a sign or a movie scene. We got the simple insistence of a location that didn't exist asking to be on a list again. Back in the switch room, later, after security and charge and I agreed we'd bothered an absence long enough, the operator showed us the curls of paper the old panel had printed. They were neat in the basket, as if someone had placed them there instead of gravity doing the work. The strip didn't care that the system feeding it was supposed to be dead, it did what it was made to do. It stamped letters that said 217, and it stamped times that were a few minutes strange, and it kept doing it until we took the paper out and looked at it and looked at one another the way people do when they're trying to decide which parts of their life need to be treated like facts. Facilities came in the next day and did what they had to, follow lines, tag breakers, test circuits, shrug at anomalies. The report they filed used words like residual, induced, and legacy path. Those words are the hospital's way of putting an arm around something and turning it toward the door. You can't blame a building for remembering itself. It had a second-floor room once, 17, and when something said the words, the building tried to make it true. Weeks later they sanded the primer. The old paint came off in strips like shed skin. The wall was new white again, smooth and anonymous, and the number lost its right to insist. But if you stood in the corridor at shift change and squinted just right, you could still see where the plaster patched itself and the light paused a little, and if you waited until a gurney rolled by and the wheels made the soft argument they always make with tile, you could imagine the floor was repeating something the speakers had wanted to say. I don't have an answer for you, only a record. The record says we heard an overhead call that named a room number that didn't exist, and then we heard it again in a place that no longer had speakers, and when we went to where the room had once been, the building made a sound like an old system testing its voice. The record says there were gurney tracks and dust drawn in arcs toward a lobby no one used, and a stencil under paint from a decade that made mistakes with color, and a strip of thermal paper that fed itself out with times that almost matched ours but not quite. The record says the hospital kept time the way some bodies do, erratically and all at once. We could write it off as power noise, or induction, or an operator with a glitch, or a contractor test gone astray, and maybe we should. We live here because we believe in cause and effect, in the arrow of time, in systems that can be diagrammed. And yet, I came on at 11 thinking I'd file a stack of something and go home with my legs clean of the tightness that comes from running codes. I left in the gray that pretends to be morning with the sense that the building had put a hand on my sleeve like a patient who doesn't want a stranger to leave yet. When the operator yawned into her fist and said she was going to make coffee, her voice echoed through the rooms that exist and the ones that don't with the same authority. I thought about the people who would come measure the corridor later and sheetrock it and paint it and name it again with a new numbering scheme and a ribbon cutting and a photograph, and I wondered if the building would be kind and let them have their clean start. If you want a moral, I don't have one that's useful. The best I can offer is that sometimes a place remembers itself so loudly you can hear it with your hands, and sometimes the only respectful thing to do is to show up, say we're here, and listen. Maybe a code is just a building's way of asking us not to forget the rooms we take away. Maybe someone once waited behind a door that had a number they could recite in the dark, and maybe in the night the building repeats it so nobody will have to wait alone again. I know how that sounds. I know the words for the mechanical reasons. I can list them alphabetically. It doesn't change the quiet certainty with which a number appeared under paint or the way the overhead chose that phrase and kept choosing it until we walked to where it belonged. On other nights, when the pager rides my hip like a small animal with its own heartbeat and the elevator dings because that's all it knows how to do, I think about 2 to 17 and a piece of paper curling into a basket and a voice saying the words it was given. If you press me for what I believe, I'll tell you this: we answered as best we could. We checked the living. We respected the dead. We tried not to talk about it too loudly in front of either. And when I catch myself listening at the end of a corridor where there isn't supposed to be anything, I stand still a little longer than policy requires and say, without making a sound, that I heard you, I hear you, I'll keep the lights on.